even though we are meeting virtually. So McGill University is situated on the traditional territory of the Kanyen Kehaka, a place which has long served as a site of meeting and exchange amongst many First Nations, including the Kanyen Kehaka of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, Huron-Wendat, Abenaki, and Anishinabeg. We recognize and respect the Kanyen Kehaka as the traditional custodians of the lands and waters on which we meet today. Also, just a few announcements for those of you just coming in. I'd like to ask the audience to please keep their microphones muted. And you can put your cameras on though, and just keep your microphones muted until all the panel members have spoken. Each panel member will speak for about 10 to 15 minutes, after which the floor will be open for questions. So please post your questions in the comment box or on the link that has been put in the comment box. And then at the end, I can read them out, or you can unmute yourself to ask your questions directly. So now to the introductions. Our first panel member is Dr. Kaberi Dasgupta. There was a slight change because Dr. Dasgupta might need to leave earlier. She's at the clinic right now. Dr. Dasgupta is a physician scientist and a professor of medicine tenured at McGill University and the McGill University Health Center. Her research focuses on the prevention, reversal, and self-management support in diabetes. She's also the director of the Center for Outcomes Research and Evaluation, CORE, at the Research Institute of the McGill University Health Center. Our second panel member is Dr. Audrey Coussy. Dr. Coussy is an assistant professor of translation studies and literary translation at the Département de littérature de langue française, de traduction et de création at McGill University. She completed a PhD in translation studies and children's literature at the Sorbonne Nouvelle Paris 3. Her research focuses on children's and young adult literature and on the theory and practice of literary translation. More specifically, she's interested in construction of identity and authority in the translating subject, creativity in translation, and wordplay. She's also been translating contemporary fiction since 2009 from English to French. And our last but not least panel member today is Dr. Robert Platt, whom I know very well as is my postdoc mentor. Dr. Platt is a professor and chair of the Department of Epidemiology, Biostatistics, and Occupational Health at McGill University. He is a senior investigator at the Research Institute of the McGill University Health Center and the Lady Davis Institute of the Jewish General Hospital. He's also an investigator at the McGill Pharmacoepidemiology Research Unit and holds the Albert Boringham I Endowed Chair in Pharmacoepidemiology. Dr. Platt is the executive co-lead and leader of the METAS team of the Canadian Network for Observational Drug Effect Studies, CNODS. His research focuses on improving methods for the study of medications using administrative data, with an emphasis on methods for causal inference and a substantive focus on medications in pregnancy. Dr. Platt is also an editor-in-chief of Statistics in Medicine and is on the editorial boards of the American Journal of Epidemiology and Pharmacoepidemiology and Drug Safety. He's published over 350 articles, a book, and several book chapters on biostatistics and epidemiology. So thank you again to all the panel members for being here. And without further ado, I will pass the virtual mic to Dr. Dasgupta.
Thank you, Vivian. When you asked me to speak, I thought, wow, is my story generalizable enough to be relevant to this kind of diverse group of postdocs? But I will tell it nonetheless, and sort of try to highlight what I think might be kind of common principles. But to back up a bit, so I entered my position as at that time assistant professor of medicine back in 2002. And I arrived, so I had trained at McGill. I'm a physician. I'd done my clinical training here at McGill, my medical school, my residency, and I did my master's in epidemiology and biostats at Robert's department. But of course, he's as young as I am, so he wasn't where he was now. And actually, after I graduated, I'm an internal medicine doctor, but my husband's a family physician, and he wanted to go to the outlying areas of the province and practice medicine in a more rural setting. And I was actually still finishing my epidemiology degree, which is my research degree. And we, at that time, thought that we were going to work, sort of have a mixed practice and work overseas in low middle income countries, and sort of all these naive and ill-formed notions of saving the world and all kinds of things that young people have. But which is nothing wrong with it, but that was kind of where our mind was. And then, as I finished my epi degree, so I was coming back and forth, and I'd actually done a cost effectiveness analysis of tuberculosis screening in Quebec. As I was finishing that, my former professors and colleagues in internal medicine here at McGill said, why don't you come back and do some research and start your academic clinical life. So I have to say I was lucky. It was something that I wanted to do, but my notions were quite ill-formed. But that was a time when there was more flexibility maybe than there is now. So I arrived and I landed in the middle of a really good environment. So that was the Division of Clinical Epidemiology at that time at the Montreal General Hospital. And I started working in the area of diabetes, which is the area in which I do research. Being a general internist, I had sort of vast interests, but this, I focused in on this area on diabetes and on health behavior change and on epi studies in diabetes. And basically what really allowed me to grow was having this family of colleagues, which included PhD epidemiologists, biostatisticians, research psychologists, other physician scientists like myself. And so it kind of provided me with the environment that if I could come up with a clinical question and start writing a grant, there was a whole group of people ready to jump on, what I was doing and offer their opinions and their guidance and their critique. And so if there was a key to my kind of development into a scientist, I think the biggest quote unquote training was after I started as a professional. And so it was that process of really listening to what others had to say, being able to respond to it, and kind of putting aside maybe, in my particular case, I had an expertise as a clinician. I'd worked for quite a while, but I had to kind of put that aside and accept that I wasn't an expert yet as a scientist, far from it. And so, however, I have to say, I tend to be quite a lucky person. So within a few months of my appointment, I did get a pilot grant from the CIHR. How that happened, I have no idea, but it happened in short order. So that set me up fairly well. It was on a small pilot trial on a particular combination of medications and supervised exercise in type 2 diabetes. And so I think that early success helped a lot. And one study led to another. There were definitely a lot of challenges on the road. So, that first success was fantastic, but it was followed by many rejected grant applications after that. The whole sort of trajectory of publishing work, presenting it, and kind of expanding from, a sort of a single project kind of base type of work to then letting the whole enterprise grow. So, I started doing more behavioral trials, intervention studies, but mixing that with large data set analysis with my, biostatistician colleagues, and sort of answering questions that required much larger data sets. So I was able to kind of combine my interest in intervention, as a physician, that's kind of key, with kind of gathering more of the information that would help justify studies. So, over the years, for example, I've done larger epi studies showing links among between diabetes risk in partners and couples, likely because of shared health behaviors. And then that has translated into studies, intervention studies involving couples, involving families. I've done studies showing links between step counts and metabolic profiles, and then that led to a trial looking at physician-delivered step count prescription. So kind of a whole body of different types of methodologies, and again, not necessarily being any, certainly to begin with, not an expert in any of those areas, but really working with methodologists and really sort of thinking through methods and learning them as I went along, and at the same time trying to maintain my content expertise and so what is kind of involved there. One aspect was again is persistence. So kind of being able to rise above disappointments of not succeeding. And then another was really kind of opening up to, again, conversation and critique, networking, which is something that we don't, always prioritize, but actually is quite crucial. So going to meetings and conferences and engaging with people, following up with emails, seeking opportunities to speak and let your work be known, that leads to collaborations, and in my case, ultimately international collaborations that have led to, I think, bigger and more interesting studies. So, along the road to developing into a research. Can you hear me? Are you okay?
I think you were muted for a short while, but
it said the host muted me, so I don't know if
I saw that as well. I don't know what happened.
Okay. So that's kind of like the overall arc. Alongside that, which maybe particularly interesting to people who are younger, was raising a family. So that's always kind of a mix of everything. So my kids are now 20 and 22, but my research career marks their growth from being toddlers to being adults. And I think sometimes people say, well, wow, that's a challenge, parenthood, that could set your career back. I'm not sure that's entirely the case. I think it's important in order to have success, whatever your career is, to be satisfied and happy in your life. And building a family certainly can be part of it. It's crucial to have a partner who supports you and you support him or her. And so that was definitely true in my case. You will have to be very organized, very on task, and perhaps in a way, I had to tell myself, especially when the kids were young, I'm going to finish most days at such and such a time. And whatever I do until that time better be so good that it's as good as someone who maybe can in a more leisurely fashion work longer. At the beginning, I felt like I shouldn't travel too much because I didn't really want to be away from the kids. And that didn't help. But I did a catch up afterwards and traveled much more later on. So you will have to do sort of logistical things to balance everything out. But you have to preserve yourself. You have to preserve your family, and it's a long game. And I think in the longer game, you will ultimately have more satisfaction and make a better contribution if you just very carefully navigate everything, you get the allies you need, work hard, and you're going to have to work hard in every aspect of what you do in life. But if you do, then, by the time you hit midlife, you can sort of be happy about your students, your projects, your kids, sort of globally. So I think that's important. Another couple of things that have been important is being out in the media. The kind of research that I do is relevant to people, and they want to know about it. And I remember when I started, it was almost a kind of a negative to be giving press interviews and to be talking about what you did. It was like descending too far from the ivory tower, but that's really changed a lot. And I think that public engagement really kind of gives an opportunity for what we do to be perhaps considered in policy and programs and general knowledge. So that can be important. And that's another vehicle through which, people hear about your work. I'm not a Twitter person. I haven't adopted that. I probably should be ashamed to say that. But that social media for sure for people has been a great tool. I try to get other people to do tweets for me, but maybe one day I'll have to change that. And so that's, I guess, overall what I wanted to say about what I've done over time. But I'm very happy to answer any questions or hear any comments.
Thank you very much, Dr. Dasgupta. That was really interesting, your journey, and I'm sure we'll have questions for you towards the end. So thank you. I'm going to go to the next speaker, Dr. Coussy, and let us hear about you.
Thank you. I just prepared some notes because I didn't want to forget anything. But first, thank you to the association for this invitation. I'm really happy to be here today, and I hope what I will say will be useful to you, and that, it's going to be helpful. So I'm going to tell you a bit about the path I took, and which led me to McGill and to my first position as a professor. So I did my PhD at the Sorbonne Nouvelle in Paris. It was in English studies with a specialization on translation studies and children's literature. And while I was doing my PhD, I also taught classes at another university in the south of France. I was a course lecturer, so it was always a bit temporary position. And while I was teaching and doing my PhD, I was also translating. I was translating books and some technical texts. So all this was a way for me to get some experience in teaching and translation, and also just to pay the bills, because I didn't get a grant to do my PhD. So I had to keep a roof over my head as well. Once I got my PhD, it was at the end of 2014. I started applying right away to positions as a professor. First, it was only in France. I was looking to stay in my country. I managed to get 2 interviews in 2 years, so that's quite good in France. But as you can guess, I didn't end up getting the jobs. The first interview, I must say, was really rough. It was a new exercise for me. I didn't really know what to expect. I was exhausted, honestly, from my PhD. The first interview happened just a few months after I defended my PhD, and as you all know, it takes time to recover. So I took this failure to be better prepared for the second interview. I rewrote and rehearsed my presentation several times with friends and with my former supervisor. I also tried to come up with a lot of the possible questions that the committees could ask me, and to prepare my answers beforehand in order to feel confident on the D-Day. So all this really improved my second interview. I was ranked second, but the first person took the job. So all this experience, I put it into my third and final interview here at McGill, where I was hired as an assistant professor in the summer of 2017. So basically, it took me 3 years to get a tenure track position at a university, which is the average time in France, but it was the average time at the time of me getting my PhD. And in the last couple of years, it's gotten worse. So I feel even more lucky to have gotten this position. And I had to expand my job research beyond my own country. As you can see, now I'm settled in Canada. And I would say it's a personal sacrifice that many people in academia have to make in order for us to find a job that, or just to find a job, that's it. So during the 3 years of my job search, I had to find a way to keep teaching and to keep doing research just to keep improving my CV. Otherwise, I would not be considered for positions. So in France, there are still very few postdocs in art. So in a way, I had to make up my own. I didn't meet the criteria to keep course lecturing at a French university. So I turned to the private sector. I applied to private institutions, and I was hired temporarily, again, temporary position, at a private institute for American universities that send their students abroad. So it was in the south of France. And I was able to keep teaching until I was hired at McGill. So I guess I need to thank the private sector for helping me pay my bills, but I also want to thank the French government, because during the month that I couldn't teach, I got the unemployment benefits from all the years that I had worked at the French university. So thank you to the government as well. During those years, research-wise, I also kept applying to conferences. And since I had to pay for all my expenses, I really tried to go for the most interesting events. What I mean by interesting is, first, obviously the topic. It had to be a topic of interest to me. The second point was the prestige of the event. Like, would it look good on my CV? It's a bit cruel to say, but when I had to choose between a little university in France and Oxford, I obviously went for Oxford, even though it was more expensive, but I knew it would maybe make a difference on my CV. And the third and last point that I took into account was, would there be at that event people that I could connect with, that maybe I could collaborate with later on. So it sounds very calculating, but conferences, it's just meeting people and keeping up to date with research, of course, but just meeting these people over dinner and engaging in conversation. For example, I ended up meeting a colleague from Dublin, and we ended up having a lot of things in common in our research. And later on, she invited me to speak at her university. She also invited me to submit papers for a special issue that she was editing. So it snowballed into something that just started over having a nice conversation over dinner. That's it. So it doesn't have to be so calculating either. So yeah, I kept applying to conferences, and the last thing that I was doing, which was also very important, was trying to get as many papers published as possible. So I took pieces of my PhD dissertation and tried to get it published by online journals. In art, I'm lucky enough that I didn't rely on expensive technology or having to be part of a lab. I would say the main difficulty for me at the time was that since I was no longer a student anywhere, I couldn't access online subscriptions, online journals, etc. So I had to rely on my network of friends that were still PhD students, that were postdocs in other countries, or that were now, assistant professors themselves. And thanks to them, I was able to keep publishing, just that, keep publishing papers, and keep up to date to current research. So all in all, if I have to summarize everything, I would say that my biggest challenge, the biggest challenge I faced after my PhD was linked to money, of course, or the lack of it. It's hard. It's hard to manage to stay afloat until you find a full-time position. So I get it. I get how you're gonna eat pasta for a while. If you don't get grants, I would advise you, for example, to turn to the private sector related to your field, like I did when I was looking to keep teaching. We don't really think about these private institutes, but it can help you, pay the bills and add to your CV. What helped me, what helped me after getting my PhD was first the network, the community that I already had. In this network, there were people that I met during my PhD, friends that were students with me, researchers I met during conferences, professors with whom I worked when I was teaching. So this network was so important just after getting my PhD. The second point that helped me was keep adding to this network by, as I said, attending conferences, for example. The third point would be still publishing, keep doing my research, keep reading, just, honing my knowledge and my expertise. The fourth point would be expanding my horizons. As I said, I started looking for work in other countries, and this is how I ended up with my McGill position. So expand your horizons. And finally, cultivating what made me stand apart, like from others, like what are your strengths? Your fields may be devalued by some, but valued by others. For example, one of my specialties is children's literature. And for the positions that I applied in France, it wasn't valued at all. But here, it's one of the reasons that I was hired at my department. They were looking for someone that had a specific area of expertise that they didn't already have. So what is not good for some is going to be great for others. So keep doing what you're doing and what you enjoy doing. That's it for me. Thank you for your attention, and I'm looking forward to discuss with you during the Q&A.
Thank you, Dr. Coussy. I like how I'm getting some emerging themes about networking and going for conferences and keeping good relationships. So that's very good. I would just like to remind everyone to please start posting your questions if you have in the chat or in the link. And then I'm gonna pass the mic to Dr. Platt.
Thanks, Vivian. Thanks for inviting me to this. I think this is a great idea. I think it's, in listening to the first two speakers, it's too bad. In a way, it's too bad you can't have 10 of us up here speaking from 10 different disciplines, because that'd give us a little, the breadth of things. But on the other hand, I think there are some real common themes that are going to come up through, certainly in my notes, a lot of the themes that have already been talked about have come up. So in terms of, I'll give a little bit about my sort of story, and then talk about some general things too. So I did an undergraduate degree in math at McGill, probably before many of you were born. I had a really good time as an undergrad at McGill. I went and then did I forget this part, it's not on my CV, but I started an MBA degree and dropped out of that program partway through. It wasn't for me, but on the other hand, it was I picked up some skills in that program that have been extremely helpful throughout my career. It's not, I don't think we all need a business degree, but you would be surprised the extent to which a principal investigator spends their time doing organizational and management kind of things. So that degree has helped me a lot. I then went, or that not degree, and then I went and did my PhD in biostatistics at the University of Washington. And I started at Washington when I was a student with the plan 100% that I was going to go into the pharmaceutical industry. Biostatisticians in the pharmaceutical industry are very good jobs. There's lots of jobs. They pay well. They're very science oriented. They're a good opportunity for someone who maybe is not interested in being a PI. And then I applied to several companies, and I had a job offer from one company that I was looking at very closely. But it was in the US. It was in New Jersey, and my wife and I are both Canadian. So as an afterthought, we looked at some positions in Canada just to see what was out there. And so I reached out to my undergraduate mentor here at McGill, and he pointed me to a position at the Montreal Children's Hospital. This was a starting position as basically a statistical consultant, non-tenure track, to work with the clinician scientists like Kaberi at the Children's, to work as a statistician on their studies. On the grand scheme of things, if we're talking about the job security, the salary, the future, etc., the job in the pharmaceutical industry was a much better job at time zero when I was looking at it. It was, a good income, a good scientific setting, a long-term focus. The person who was trying to hire me, he was looking at, here's a trajectory that you might follow if you want to go into scientific leadership. Here's a trajectory if you want to follow if you want to go into administrative leadership. It was really a well-planned organization. At the Children's, they said, we have money for 3 or 4 years of salary. You can see what you can do with it. So it was much less secure at the Children's. But on the other hand, the strength of the position at the Children's, and this is a theme that you've heard throughout today, was it was really being pushed by a guy named Mike Kramer, who is one of the leaders in pediatric research in Canada of the last 40 years. And he became my main collaborator at the Children's. And it was surrounded by a very good network of potential collaborators and potential mentors. So including my current close colleague, Tammy Suissa, who was on the search committee that hired me at that point, had similar training to me and has served as a mentor sort of all my career. So I ended up obviously taking the job at Montreal Children's. It worked out really well. This makes me think of something that sort of both Kaberi and Audrey said about the value of luck and opportunity in how you look for things. If I hadn't reached out and tried to have a call with my undergrad mentor, I never would have heard about this position at McGill, and I wouldn't have ended up here. I also took a look and was able to think about the group of people here that, in spite of the lack of job security, were setting me into a spot where at the worst, I would have 3 or 4 productive years and then have to figure something else out for myself. But it looked like a place where I could come and have fun. And then it sort of went on from there. I was successful with some grants. Most important thing, and I'm going to talk about this in a second, I sort of became known as the statistician expert in perinatal epidemiology and pediatric research relatively early on in my career. And so people started coming to me with projects, and that sort of started this ball rolling of more and more things. And then from there, I eventually got on the tenure track at McGill, and my research career was established. So that's sort of the backstory, but now I want to go and talk a little bit just about some general things that strike me, both about my story and about the ones we heard so far today. I mean, I said already the value of luck and opportunity. That is, chance encounters can lead to new jobs or interesting results or interesting collaborations. Recognizing that those chance encounters can lead to new collaborations and new interesting things, and recognizing that what looks on paper like the perhaps worst job may end up being the one with more opportunity in it in the long run, is the sort of the first thing that I have seen repeatedly in my career and in others' development. I think Kaberi said something about the fact that you're always learning, and the fact that, you know, when you start, I think this is really important. When you start as a principal investigator or as a new faculty member, you have a lot of training, but you don't really know how to do anything at that point. That's a little bit facetious, but there's still a lot to learn, and you still have to keep developing, and you still have to keep growing in order to keep moving things along. The third general point I want to highlight, and this is something that Audrey, your story helped me crystallize this, and that is the value of money and the fact that you have to eat are important things. And, you know, academia is unfortunately really good at convincing you that your work is more important than the need to eat. And I think that's something that we have to disabuse ourselves a little bit of. And we also have to think about, you know, yours is a really good example of making sure that you have marketable skills that you can use in commercial environments, as a consultant, as a translator, whatever, in order to keep yourself moving along your career path without trouble with actually paying the bills. I talked a little bit about the environment. The role of the environment is critical in your job search. You know, there will be jobs that look better on paper, but maybe are not structured in a way that you're going to flourish. Think about whether this is the right fit for you. You know, if you're looking at jobs, talk to other junior investigators in that area, in that department, see how it's going, see how they fit together, how things fit together for them. The value of mentoring is very important. I think throughout your career, you'll either have mentors, you'll be assigned mentors. The one thing that I think is really critical with regard to mentoring is to learn to work with multiple mentors and to sort of be able to distill information from multiple people into something that's useful for you. Because if you have one mentor, they're going to tell you one thing, and that's going to be from their perspective. And that may or may not also be your perspective. They'll learn about you, but they won't necessarily understand you the way that you understand yourself. Whereas if you hear from 5 people, you may hear contradictory advice, but then that forces you to learn about yourself and understand how the advice comes together for you. The last thing I'll focus on that I think is we all underestimate and is really critically important in the transition from a postdoc fellow or a student to a principal investigator or a tenure track faculty is to learn the system in which you're working. And by that, I mean the administrative systems, the support staff, how you get things done. You know, you're going to have support staff who work with you on your projects and on your grants. How they feel about you is really important to actually the success of your work. So first of all, be nice to them. Recognize that they are a critical part of the process of your work. Second of all, listen to them, because they know where you're going to hit roadblocks within the bureaucratic system of the university or the research institute or wherever you're working. And then ask them well in advance about the procedures in the center. If you have a grant deadline that's due September 15th, talk to your support person in April about how you get to September 15th without creating any deadline problems, and make sure that you understand every step of the way. They will help you with things like internal reviews, which, you know, Vivian knows from our recent grant funding experience, having an internal review of your grant where it gets torn apart by people who are local is really good for making it better for when it actually goes out to the competitive review. So things like that for junior investigators are really important. They're terrible and hard on your ego because they're usually tough reviews, but they always make the project better. And I think I will wrap up there. I've got lots more I could talk about, but I want to hear a little bit from you guys as well, and hear what's on your minds.
Thank you very much, Rob. That was very interesting to also know that you're an MBA dropout and so many skills that you gained. So yeah, I do have some questions in the comment section here, but I just have a question I wanted to throw out to three of you first before I go to those questions. And as all of you said, you're still learning and you had some time to learn and you keep growing. So at what point did you feel like you were now an independent researcher? Like, was it when you got tenured? Was it when you got your first grant? Was it when you stopped asking questions or publishing without your previous supervisors? What was it? You can start, Dr. Kaberi, if you want to.
Sure. No, that's a great question. I was thinking about it. I think what's, I said to someone the other day that there's this strange inflection point that you don't have any time to celebrate when you go from feeling like you have to prove yourself all the time to everybody coming to you with demands. So I don't know exactly how to describe it, but you go from, oh my God, and that's lifelong. I need to get the next grant. I need to make the next publication. I need to get the next student through that. That happens, like that's throughout your career. It's at least in certain domains, and that's par for the course. I won't say it becomes easier, but you become more resilient and more resourceful over time. But throughout in academia, you do have to be proving yourself to different audiences. And I love how Robert summarized everything, but I think it's also like you have to satisfy different jurisdictions or different, sort of different people and still maintain your integrity and your vision. But as you're doing that, there will come a point where suddenly people need you to join this committee, lead this initiative, do this and that. And they may not be explicitly saying it, but you realize, I must have arrived as a researcher. Otherwise, why would these important and talented people be kind of coming to me? So when did that happen? I mean, honestly, probably within the last 5 years, even though I've kind of, described a 20-year arc. That's what I would say. I'm really curious to hear what Audrey and Robert say in response.
Yeah,
it's interesting. Yeah, Audrey.
Yeah, it was so interesting, Kaberi. Which said, I had this thought when I was doing my PhD that once I had my PhD, I did my defense, catharsis, I would feel independent. And yeah, I am a doctor now. I wish it had been the case, but there is very much what you said, Kaberi. It's just the outside world making you feel like, oh, now I'm independent, now I'm an expert, which I agree with you, we keep learning, and that's the beauty of the job. So for me, I would say I started feeling a bit more self-assured once I stepped into my office at McGill. Like, I had this office that was like, this is your own space, and there's like Professor Coussy on the nameplate, and I started to believe it. I started to be like, okay, I'm independent, and I know what, like, I have some things that I know I want to share, and I'm not an expert. Yeah, I hate that word, but yeah, I do know stuff about things. So yeah, I really wish to all of you that just the fact that you're postdocs, consider that you already know things. You should feel empowered by that, like you have agency in that.
I think both of you said that really well, and I think I'm going to go back to Kaberi, what you started with, and I think this is really the the challenging part of this is that there are a series of these inflection points where you go from nobody listens to me to everyone wants a piece of my time and I don't have time to explain myself to everyone. And, that might be just, about your specific narrow area of research. Then it might be about your field, and then it might be, about the university or whatever, and it just keeps growing and growing, and it happens repeatedly like that. The real challenge with it is, many of those times it's like Kaberi described, you don't realize that you've made that transition until you recognize all of a sudden, oh wait, people are listening to me. And so I think you have to look for those kinds of signals, like, oh, I've been asked to be on this panel evaluating something at the national level, or, I remember in my case, it was along the lines of being invited to go sit on a panel at the CDC in the US because they had read something that I had written and they wanted my advice on something else. I said, okay, that means they must be thinking that I know something about something. And I mean, like Kaberi said too, it continues. I started as department chair in September, and for the, until today, plus or minus, it's still a feeling of, okay, I still don't know what I'm doing, and I'm not sure people are listening to me, but I'm starting to see that, oh wait, people are listening, and things are turning. It keeps going like that. It's sort of a fundamental, it's a fundamental part of our existence in academia, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks for the response. I want to open to the audience if anybody wants to unmute themselves and ask a question. Otherwise, I have some other questions here. While we are waiting for people to decide, I'm going to read one of the questions. So this is from Fred, and they're asking, as a postdoc, what kind of non-obvious activities have the best return on investment in becoming an independent researcher? So I know, Rob, you talked about some, and Kaberi talked about some organizational skills, but I'm happy to hear more about what other activities or skills that you think would have the best return for becoming an independent researcher.
Well, Vivian, I think you could answer that, because I honestly, I met you on a even though this is typical for McGill, it's like people are in different countries practically, even though we're in the same ecosystem. But I met you on a heart and stroke panel for a conference, and you were chairing the conference, and I was part of the panel. And this really intelligent lovely postdoc is chairing with such confidence, and it's a national thing. I mean, that's a huge feather in your cap. And then taking on this role, a leadership role within the postdoc group, and organizing this, all of those things I think show leadership and initiative. For sure, we don't want to become like overwhelmed with them, but as long as you're following your interest, to have visibility, networking opportunities, listening to ideas, as opposed to, there is a tendency for us to want to retreat, and rightly so, to do our research and retreat into our corner. There is time that has to be done doing that, but you do have to interface with the outside world, and not everybody is as ready immediately to do that, but I think you have to set yourself some goals to get there.
Thanks. Yeah, that's a good activity, as you said, leadership activity. I think Mary raised her hand, I think, to ask a question. So Mary, if you're still there, you can ask your question.
Hi. So there's a couple of things you said that really struck me as a postdoc, is the fact of having your office. and having to deal with what has been coined the imposter syndrome. And it's funny, it seems to sort of like, it's a vase communicant. One goes down, the other goes up. You get an office, you get a bit rid of that imposter syndrome. So you sort of, until you get an office somewhere, which has been basically the challenge of my graduate life, it's very difficult to sort of bring this this assertion, this leadership aspect to try and find your pathway in there. I'm more on sort of in the branch Professor Coussy is in, so it's translation studies and literature and all that. So I don't know, it's just the office struck a real bell with me when I heard that. And I mean, I just find it unfortunate as postdocs that we don't have a right to an office. I mean, in our department. So, and I understand it's questions of space, and I mean, it's not I'm not ranting here. It has absolutely nothing to do with that, but it goes a long way to helping you feel legitimate as a postdoc. Like all my boxes are here with me in my house. So no, I just wanted to say that this is sort of like I don't know if it's more of a comment than a question, because we don't often get to exchange any sort of information either. It's very like a lonely space sometimes.
Yeah. Well, at least now most of us are working from home, so we can create our own offices and feel like bosses.
Yeah, exactly.
So, yeah. There is a question from Essay, and they ask, was it easy for you to find research projects early in your professor career? So I don't know, like, did you have to find it? Did you create one yourself? Maybe Rob, you can answer that, or Audrey?
Well, I think it's a great question when you come out of your PhD, like you feel like you're done with your subject because you've spent so many years studying it. So I was a bit afraid that I wouldn't find something new to say, that my PhD, like all I had in me, I put in my PhD and that was it. So I really understand the concern that can be expressed through that. I think, yeah, Kaberi, you said follow your interest. I think that could be it. For me, you know, in my field, I'm really less dependent on grants and a lab, etc. So I could really base my new research project or projects following my interest, and knowing that I was contributing in a new way to my field. Like, look into your interests, look at what's being done right now in research in your field, and then try to build maybe a project to ask for a grant that will help you to structure your project and how you want to go about it. But yeah, I think it's what's happening right now in your field. Will you add to that? Will it be original for you? And what's interesting to you? Really, this is what's driving us, especially when we don't have a full-time position yet. At least there's something that's nourishing us as well.
Yeah. Rob, did you want to say something?
I was going to say that's very well said, and I do remember, you know, the probably for about a month after I had signed the paper saying I was coming to McGill, I was like, how am I ever going to come up with an original idea for a research project? I had my ideas and they're done now, you know. That was how I felt. And then, you know, it's kind of what was just described, plus just stumbling into ideas and stumbling into projects. And I think the one thing that I learned early on in my career was never underestimate the power of a small idea. If it's something that is, you know, not very big, but can be turned into a paper, turn it into a paper and produce that, and then see where it leads. Maybe it leads to another paper, maybe it leads to a small project that ends up in a grant. My first published paper wasn't from my thesis. It was I had worked as a consultant for a biotech company in Seattle, and I had implemented something that I thought was just obvious while I was there. And then I was talking to, in my job interview here, I was talking to Jim Hanley, who's one of our colleagues at McGill. And I said, oh yeah, I was working on this consulting project and I did this. And he said, oh, that's great. And then you could do this, 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 and this. And the next thing you knew, Jim and I had published a paper on this, what I thought was a little idea. And so, and that led to a couple more papers down the line. So thinking about those sort of positioning yourself, like Audrey said, to have, to know where the potential gaps are and where the potential ideas might be, but then following these small ideas where they might lead. Some of them lead to dead ends, others lead to projects.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. And what Audrey said, I think a key piece is having a community of people, and they have to be people you can trust, but just talking out your ideas. You have to be able to as Robert was saying, he spoke to his our colleague, Jim Hanley, and it's in those conversations that your ideas will crystallize. And you also do need to give oxygen to your creativity, because research is a creative exercise, I think, above all else. And so you have to have ideas. You have to recognize when you have an idea, because it's true. You sometimes have a great idea that you're like, no, that's just a thing I would normally do, but no, it might not be. So yeah, I think, and you may not come with your most brilliant idea on day one after your postdoc. That's okay. It may take time for thoughts and ideas to germinate, but you will have to take the time to kind of sit down, or, as you're going for a walk or as you're showering. That's when your ideas are going to come up. And then you have to talk to other people and kind of really hone down and move from an intuition to a real question. I think that I just want to circle back to that space comment, because of course, also in my administrative role, space is the bane of my existence and finding space for people. So I'll just put something out there. I totally get like having an office space. I'm one of those, nerds that I like to go to my office every day, rain or shine, I'll go in and I work best from there. But there are definitely people who, work well from home or from other places, or they want a combination of the two. And yet, they want the symbolic office there with a nameplate there. So I think we have to really think about what that physical space means. I do agree we need a venue where we can meet with colleagues, post pandemic. And I hope that world, or, well, I don't know if the world is going there, but in Canada and Montreal, we will get there. It's going to be, I'm sure, a hybrid model for most people. And so we're going to have to figure out what is the best of both worlds. And so office spaces may become shared offices, or may become shared spaces. And, there will probably still be a place for a home office. And the person who spoke, I have to say, your workspace looked very cozy. I could see the red sofas in the back, and, so it's okay. Like, when I first started my clinical practice, I couldn't practice without having a sort of a lab jacket on, a physician's jacket on. And then where I went to work, nobody was wearing one. So I stopped, and then I stopped needing to have that jacket to feel like a doctor. And I think it's, the same for as you become more confident in your role. I'm not saying don't advocate for office space, because it's important to have, but it's not the only thing that makes you independent. And, for sure, there are people who work strictly from virtual space, and they curate this beautiful, sort of image, and that works for them. So.
Yeah, thank you for that. So we're running out of time, but I'm just going to ask this one last question, and if you guys can answer and then just give your final thoughts, that would be great. So Santiago is asking, does the position of principal investigator or researcher have specific requirements, and what are these requirements, if so? So Audrey, do you want to go?
Yeah, sure. For me, I would say it's whatever you were doing during your PhD, what you're doing during your postdoc. This is what you need. Like you're getting, sorry, it's the word in French, formation. This
Training.
is training. Yes, thank you. You're getting your training right now. Like you're doing it. Like knowing how to work independently and turning to the community when you need it, coming up with ideas, also cutting yourself a break. As Kaberi said, cultivate your creativity. Sometimes it's just going for a walk, or just you can't have good ideas, or you can't have ideas if you're all burned out. I know it, I was burned out. So also take care of yourself. But whatever you're doing right now, this is preparing you for, becoming an independent researcher, becoming first, sorry, it's the word for science, primary researcher. What?
Yeah, it's for investigator. So,
yeah, see your current experience as training as well.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Rob, do you want to add to that? Any requirements?
Yeah. I think the requirement, like there are going to be requirements that are specific to different environments and different different fields. So the three of us probably have different sets of sort of, this is what you have to get done in order to progress through your tenure reviews and so on. But the characteristics I think that we're looking for are probably similar, that, like Audrey just said, it's a matter of your training and you're progressing and you're building sort of step by step towards and then through independence as a researcher. And like Kaberi said earlier, it's not like there's a switch that goes off and you're an independent researcher, but it's just the characteristics are you're developing ideas and you're finishing those ideas off in terms of getting, whether it's grants or papers or projects. And then you're starting to train other people to have ideas and train other people to build through their projects. And that's the sort of the characteristic and the principle I would aim for in terms of what an independent investigator is aiming towards.
I agree. Dr. Kaberi?
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, I think, for sure, in all of you are in your postdoc training, and some of you will decide to go for kind of a faculty level principal investigator role. Others may take on, there will be different job opportunities in industry and government. Even within academia, there are a variety of roles. So, and all of that's okay. You have to follow what's available, what you're interested in. But if to become what you need as a principal investigator, and again, a skill that you develop over time, is flexibility and stubbornness, humility and maybe a touch of arrogance. It's kind of like these dichotomies. Like you have to be crazy enough to think that I can have ideas that can grow into something interesting, but yet you have to be ready to say, but here are all the reasons why that's maybe not going to work out. So you have to be able to juggle that dichotomy or those paradoxes, and then still move things forward. And I think over time develop kind of a vision of where you see your life work going. First you'll have individual projects, but then you should have kind of a vision of where it's going to head and how you get there, because there'll be a lot of divergent paths, and some of them you might decide to make a shift and move along those, but you're not going to be able to do everything. So you have to try to keep a bit of a connectedness among your initiatives. And basically, as you're building your idea as a principal investigator, it is with a goal of building a body of knowledge for a particular aim. It's not all just to survive. It's also, you want to be able to kind of arrive at some point where you'll be able to say, okay, I made a contribution, and that contribution involved generating knowledge, implementing it, training others, it's all going to be part of it. But it's hard to see all of that from the beginning, but that's where you want to go ultimately, I think.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Kaberi. I'm happy you mentioned vision, because somebody just asked a question about what kind of questions should you be asking yourself to help you decide whether to pursue a career as a tenure track investigator. So were there any questions in your head when you were doing your research initially? And
yeah, so I mean, I think, I kind of came in with this notion that I was approaching it, and I approached it from kind of a physician's perspective, but I'm someone, I very much am interested in the non-drug approaches to therapy. So be it physical activity, diet, sleep, emotions, there's a whole package of things that sometimes seems strange as a physician to be interested in, but I prescribe lots of medications, don't get me wrong. So my overall vision was, how do we optimize and maximize? And then in terms of medications, what do we use judiciously and well? So when I was, moving along my trajectory, when I was having a crossroads where, the grants weren't working as well, some people came to me and they said, look, you're a doctor and you could do, so you can recruit people and put them in trials for medications. Like, why aren't you doing that? And there's nothing wrong with that. I think that's great, but that wasn't what I wanted to do, because, I'm lucky. My backup plan is just doing more of my clinical practice. So I didn't have to worry about putting food on the table, because that side of my job is always there. But I was fussy, and I said, well, this is the kind of research I want to do. And if I can't do, research that resonates with me in terms of my vision, I do have other things I can do. So, how do I reconcile that? And I think that is where the stubbornness worked, because I had to move from this more global notion of these other modalities of therapy to what did I mean? And so distilling it down to, yes, physical activity is good for you, but, getting people to kind of work towards change is hard. And so how do you do that? And so I was one of the earlier people to kind of look at step counters. Now everybody does it, and everybody has a Fitbit, but people didn't necessarily in the mid 2000s. And so it was, that could be used as a delivery tool integrated into a doctor-patient relationship. So I think it's now I've deviated so far from your original question. I'm not sure where I'm at, but it's kind of like having that vision and then deciding and letting your questions then really reflect that vision, as opposed to kind of being vague, which they will be at the beginning.
Thank you. Rob, did you want to say something? What was in your head when you were dropping out of school and starting?
I think, and I mean, I think, I guess that's a really good question, because I have to think a lot about it. But part of the reason I wanted to go to the pharmaceutical industry when I was doing my PhD is that in the pharmaceutical industry, they put a really, really high value on well done statistical work, which is what I do. They don't put it's not a high priority to come up with new ideas for research in statistics. It's a high priority to do very, very solid work and make sure that everything is done well. And so I had that as sort of an idea in my head along the way. And then I realized that I could do that in, at a hospital, at the Montreal Children's Hospital with the colleagues there, to try to make their work include the best possible statistical approaches. And then all of a sudden, talking to them and talking to some of my other statistician colleagues, we said, oh, wait, there is no best possible statistical approach here. And then you go, I have something to work on as an independent researcher doing my own thing. I didn't think I was going to have any ideas, but then the ideas sort of made themselves by saying, okay, there's this hole, we have to fill this hole. And the vision of doing good statistical practice for other people's research generated the ideas for myself.
Yeah, if I can just add to that, I would say that the question of the vision was important for me as well, and stubbornness. I love that. Also, I set myself a time limit. After I got my PhD, I was like, okay, I'm gonna try to find a full-time position in the next 5 years. If I don't, then I will start thinking of another path. And it was in a way comforting knowing that I was in charge of that time limit in a field where you often really don't feel in charge of a lot of things. So I was like, okay, I have 5 years. What can I do to make my vision come true? I need to publish, I need to go to a conference, to go to conferences, and I need to keep teaching. And then I was like, okay, so I can do that for this to happen. So I would say having the vision, believing in the part of you that's like called to this path, and maybe set yourself a time limit so you maybe still feel in charge, even though it's quite uncertain times once you're done with the PhD and the postdoc.
Thank you. I like that. Does anybody else have a question quickly, or you can unmute yourself and speak because I can't see. Otherwise, I'm going to wrap up the session. I just want to thank you, Dr. Platt, Dr. Kaberi, Dr. Coussy, for this session. I've learned a lot from all of you, and I hope that all of us have learned something great as well. And we all hope that we can become independent researchers in the nearest future, or in pharmacy or pharmaceutical industry, or doing MBA or something. But anyway, I believe that will grow from here. So thank you so much for taking the time to be here. And I also like to thank my fellow APF committee members, Matthew, Farhad are here as well. And thank you all for coming. And yes.
Thank you, Vivian. That was lovely. Yeah.
Thank you. That was
Thank
a lot
you.
of fun.
Yeah, I learned
Thanks
a
for the
lot.
great questions, everyone.
Thank you.